So we are talking to Dr. Carter Stout today. Hello. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Laura.
Yeah, I feel like I know you. I mean, we had a conversation before, but I don't know. I feel like our paths must have crossed at some point, being that we're both in the same city and we have some of the same past activities. So um let's see if we run across that during the interview. But I
Sure.
wanted to just say that or ask you if you know there's a site called The Secret Meaning of Your Name. Have you ever seen this?
I have never seen that site. No, I have not.
So it's the secret meaning of your name, first or last. So I put in first name Carter, which is a different meaning than the last on this site. So I'm going to read you what it says for secret meaning for the first name Carter, which is Carder.
Yes.
Yes. So it means, it says, that your heart's desire is to help and care for those you love. You treasure family values and traditions. You are willing to sacrifice yourself for the sake of others. Giving advice is a natural ability for you. You are somewhat hesitant to show your artistic talents. People appreciate the love you give to them. So, what do you
I
think of that?
mean, if I were to write a little description of who I am, I think that would be
Yes, I'll
pretty
send
accurate.
it to you. Yeah. I'll text it over to you so you have it. But
Yeah,
I thought from what I know about you, that was right in line with who you are. So
it really is. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. Well,
that's,
great. We're gonna go on, but first I'm Laura Cathcart Robbins, and this is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, honey. So, like I said before, we are talking to author and depth psychologist. We're going to find out what that means later. Dr. Carter Stout. And I'm so excited for this conversation. Um, your publicist sent me a really great pitch about your new book, We Are All Addicts, which I understand is doing very well. I'm really excited about that book. And I love the idea. You know, I love the idea of your book. I love the pitch she sent. Wasn't sure what your only one story was, though. And so you and I had a conversation, and then you told me the story of your 2020 memoir, Lost in Ghost Town. And I think my jaw hit the floor. And
yeah.
that's it. That's it. That's the story you're going to tell.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm going to ask you really to tell us that story. I'm going to kind of lead you through it. The way I think you started was this occurred at a time when you were deep into a drug addiction. If,
Yes.
okay, so tell me when that was, what was going on, and just tell me about that.
This was about 2000, late 2002 and early 2003.
Mm.
And I had just finished a stint in rehab on the west side of Los Angeles at a place in Mar Vista called Promises.
Ah,
And at the time, it was really one of the only rehabs that were around. And I had been there for 30 days. The program had recommended that I do some aftercare. And they had two sober livings, very small little one-story sober livings, just north of Lincoln Boulevard, so just on the outskirts of Venice.
mm-hmm.
And I had never lived on the West Side before. I had done most of my using and drinking and partying in Hollywood and in New York City. So I thought the West Side was going to be this new beginning for me, this very fresh start. And the seaside air was going to be great for me, and I was going to go for walks on the beach. And little did I know that at the time in 2003, that Venice, or a specific neighborhood in Venice, which is about 2 square miles, called the Oakwood neighborhood of Venice, which the addicts and others called Ghost Town,
Mm-hmm.
was the epicenter of the gang drug activity on the west side of Los Angeles. And I had no idea, and no one informed me, and no one told me. And so there I was, fresh out of sober living, and I got my first apartment, little tiny little hole in the wall studio right near the ocean. And I was going to AA meetings, and I had a sponsor. I was trying to be sober, really enjoying this new beginning. And I was walking up the street into the Oakwood neighborhood to go and buy some food. And a drug dealer accosted me on the street and said, what do you need? What do you need? And I just, in that moment, wasn't strong enough to say no.
Okay, wait. So I'm just going to stop you for a second. So you're newly sober. Like how many days, months would you say then?
I had about maybe 60 days of sobriety.
60 days of sobriety. And are you walking? Are you on foot?
I am on foot.
You're on foot. You're going to get some food. You have every intention of just
Mhm.
getting food. You're not looking to score.
I'm not looking to score. I had no idea that I could even score in Venice.
Right.
I was walking up Abbot Kinney,
Mhm.
which now, as people know, is sort of this very posh,
Posh hipster. Yeah.
hipster
Yeah.
type of road. But back then, there were just a few stores on it and two restaurants and a bar.
Right.
And the rest of the storefronts were empty. And so I was walking up to the local little convenience store,
Mm-hmm.
and a woman confronted me and said, what do you need? What do you, and
So it's a woman.
it was a woman. Yeah, it was a woman.
Um, just before we go further in that story, tell us how long you've been drinking and using up before you went into sober living that time.
Okay. My drinking and using really started when I was a teenager.
Mhm.
Back then, it was mainly alcohol and hallucinogenics. I grew up in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. And when I was a teenager, I started following the Grateful Dead
Like literally
and
following them?
went to concerts up and down the East Coast with my friends, and we would take mushrooms, we would take acid, and that, after I graduated from college, led me to New York City. In New York City, it was a lot of drinking, and that's where I was really introduced to cocaine.
Ah,
And cocaine was really what ultimately brought me to my knees.
got it.
But it was about 5 or 6 years of
Mhm.
usage.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, of course, it was a lot of fun, and it made me feel confident. It made me feel talkative and intelligent, and everyone else around me was doing it. And little by little, I realized that when they were all going home, I was trying to go out and find some more of it, and would spend the next day by myself doing it. And that was the beginning of the trajectory of the cocaine usage. And I moved to Los Angeles not too long after,
Mhm.
and found a bungalow up in Hollywood in Beechwood Canyon. And a friend of mine from Greenwich, Connecticut, who I had known growing up, had me over to his apartment one night. And he said, I have some crack cocaine,
Mhm.
and would you like to smoke some? And I thought, well, that's a line that I would never cross. I would never do that. But twist my arm a little bit, and my adventurous spirit came out. And I tried it with him in his apartment, and it just hit me like a freight train.
Mm.
And from that point forward, I never really wanted to inhale powder anymore. I wanted to smoke it.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that's what took you to treatment.
That's what took me to treatment. About a year of smoking in my Hollywood bungalow
Yeah.
with a lot of friends, um, coming in and out and being actively concerned about me,
Hmm.
and ultimately having almost sort of a transient life coming in and out of my bungalow. I sold pretty much everything that I could.
Yeah.
I had a car, but it was barely running. I had blown through the savings that I had had from selling my apartment in New York City,
Mm.
and then realized at that time that something had to change.
Yeah.
And that's when I went into treatment.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think that's really important to the story, is just to see what's at stake here when she comes up to you and says, "What do you need?" So then continue from there.
I was fully intent at that time in 2003 on having a life of sobriety.
Yeah.
I had just completed treatment. I was very involved in the program. I was very proud of receiving a 60-day chip. I was praying every morning, meditating, doing the steps. And in that moment, when she approached me, all of my defenses came down and I said yes. And I had $40 in my pocket, and I
That
gave
was
her the
your mark.
$40. She gave me 2 big rocks of crack cocaine,
Yeah.
and I went back, and that was the beginning
Okay.
of the next year of my life.
So back into the depths of this disease of despair. You talked briefly about your car. I
Mhm.
happen to know that it was a Ford Taurus, right?
Yes.
You had your only possession that was left. Tell me about how that factors into the next part of your life.
Well, I'd gotten to the point, and this was maybe a few months after I had first relapsed and started smoking again, where I once again didn't have any money. I was being evicted from my small little studio in Venice because my family had cut me off again. They knew what I was up to, wanted nothing to do with me. So I didn't have a computer. I didn't have a cell phone, no way to communicate with me or get in touch with me. I didn't have anything of value anymore to sell. So I was panhandling out on the street corner,
Mm.
and, essentially just to buy or to have money for food. And I was approached by this homeless guy that I knew from the neighborhood, because I had, been walking in and out of the neighborhood and had met a few folks. And he told me that there was a big dealer in Oakwood who was looking for someone to drive him around. And
Right.
I thought, okay, here's an opportunity where maybe I can get some money and get some free product. And he brought me over to this guy, and his name was Flynn,
Hmm.
over to his house, which was just, maybe a half a mile away from where I lived. And Flynn wasn't there at the time, but his grandmother was there, and he lived with his grandmother. And his grandmother greeted us at the door and took us in
Mm.
and asked questions about who we were. And she could tell, I think, that I hadn't eaten in a while, and made a big um, dinner
Hmm.
for me and sat with me and spoke to me. And I instantly felt this incredible connection to her and her kindness and her maternal instincts. And it was something that I was just yearning for, that I had just been missing so much.
Yeah.
And part of my story is that I felt that one element that was driving my addiction always was this feeling of abandonment and rejection from my own parents.
Mm.
I hadn't received the kind of attention that I needed and the sort of love that I needed. Um, And so here I was in this moment with this grandmother figure, and she was Black and I was white. But I felt no strangeness in that moment, that I was entering into her home as someone she didn't know. She accepted me with open arms, and color really wasn't a factor at all. And so we waited for her grandson, Flynn, who did not show up.
Yeah.
And she told me to come back the next day to meet up with him. So the next day I stopped by again, and that's when I met Flynn, who had formerly been affiliated with the Shoreline Crips gang and had done 2 stints in prison and had just gotten out a few months before, and was a little bit younger than me,
Mm-hmm.
but not really too much of an age separation. I was 34 at the time, 35, and he was maybe 33.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I think he initially looked at me as sort of, someone perhaps that he could take advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was white and had a clean driving record, and he was going to be able to maybe exploit that, and it would take some heat off of him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at him as sort of a meal ticket for myself to get some of the product that he was distributing, and also maybe get some money. So I think initially we looked at each other as an opportunity. And he took me out for a spin, or I took him out for a spin in my car. And we started talking, and almost instantaneously, we just felt like we were cut from the same cloth.
Mm.
And it's really interesting because he grew up in a family that was very fractured and very splintered. He had a mother who was a drug addict. My mother was an alcoholic.
Mm.
He had a father who abandoned him at age 10 and just left. And my father had left our family as well, and moved to a different continent when I was a teenager. Or no, I'm late teenager, early 20s.
Mm.
And when I was shipped off to boarding school, he had been shipped off to juvie.
Mm-hmm.
And there were just these really parallel narratives from very different environments, different socioeconomic backgrounds, but a shared common experience.
Right.
And we recognized it right off the bat and knew it. And also, we were playing music, and the two of us were singing along in the car. And what initially began as this perhaps opportunistic relationship, soon it became evident that the two of us were just going to be close friends.
That's so
And
great. I just have
over the course,
no, I'm sorry. I just have a couple questions before you go on. I want to not just be, I want to ask the questions that I think the listeners are wanting to know as
sure.
we go along. Um, do you think that he was looking for someone that was kind of clean driving record and white to drive him around?
Yes,
So that was why the guy approached you,
yes,
the car, and you had those qualities. Um,
yes.
and then what did your day look like when you picked him up? Like, what did you do? Because I would picture like a drug dealer's driver to be kind of muscle or intimidating in some way. And I hope you're watching us on YouTube. Um, I would not describe you as intimidating. I, I would definitely describe you as clean cut. Maybe you look more intimidating then. I don't know. But um, tell me what the day would look like when you would.
I certainly was not the muscle.
Yeah.
I did not look intimidating. I think he was looking for a clean cut white kid
Yeah.
who was gonna not draw any attention to
Right.
him
Mm-hmm.
and who had a clean license plate on his car.
Right.
So when I was driving around, there wouldn't be any attention drawn to the vehicle.
Yeah.
And our days progressed, in the beginning weeks, it was just making some deliveries here and there.
Mhm.
And then as we became more connected and felt more comfortable around each other, it was, well, let me teach you about how this operation works, and let me teach you about the neighborhood.
Mm.
And so we would post up in the car and we would, sit on the curb, and he would say, that person is that type of person that's walking down the street. And that guy's an undercover cop. You can tell by his shoes.
What
And these
were the
people aren't really serious, because there were always dealers that were out in the Oakwood neighborhood in Ghost Town.
sure.
And so we would post up and we would sort of look at what was transpiring in the hood. And so it was almost like he was giving me an education
I love that. I love
from
that. But tell me, what kind of shoes would an undercover cop have?
brand new ones,
Brand new ones. Okay.
like brand new
Like kicks.
Adidas,
Yeah.
white.
Yeah. And then you'd be like, you're
He'd be like, no, those shoes definitely did not fit the clothes that the guy's wearing. And I've seen that guy around before, and he's nosing around. And,
Mhm.
every once in a while there would be a sting operation set up, and people would get caught up in it, some people. So he was just giving me little pointers and little tips. And I remember this one, as we spent more time together, he brought me in a little bit further and he would trust me more. And we would make deliveries down to Compton and some to South Central, but also some in Santa Monica. And he had sort of a clientele, like a book of clientele of
Mm.
people that would page him and that would call him. And some of them were affluent, and some of them were, more street gang type of people. And he would always bring me and introduce me as, um, the nickname that I had was Hollywood,
Okay.
because they thought that I looked like Viggo Mortensen
Yeah. Yeah.
at the time. At the time, I did more than I do now. In any sense, it was right when the Lord of the Rings had come out, and
Yeah. We
he
just
was
watched that.
he was someone that was maybe pretty well known at that time,
Yeah.
and I resembled him. I really did.
Mhm.
And so I would tell people that I was his cousin,
Oh, nice.
and so hence I got the nickname Hollywood.
Right.
So he would say, "This is my brother Hollywood," and people would say, "What are you doing bringing a white boy down here?" And he said, "Oh no, he's cool. He's cool. He's got my back. He's part of my operation." And and it brought me into, some fairly precarious situations where I was scared for my life. One time I got mugged when he went in to make a delivery, and some guys pulled me out of the car and they beat me up in an alley, and he came running around and he said, no, 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 he's with me. And everyone had a lot of respect for Flynn,
Mhm.
because he was, a high ranking member of the Crips for a while. And so they left me alone. And, the word on the street was that I wasn't supposed to be touched.
Wow. Wow.
And, we went to some clubs, and that were all black clubs, and I was the only white person, and he would bring me in and they'd say, no, you can't do that. And then he would say, you know who this is, and he would And they would say, I thought I recognized him, you know? Oh, okay, okay, we'll let him in. We'll let him in. And so it was a afternoon and a nighttime of adventure.
Right.
Sometimes it felt dangerous, sometimes it felt very jovial and light. We really enjoyed each other's company. We laughed a lot, we sang a lot. I felt a brotherhood with him
Mm-hmm.
that I had so been missing and so been hoping to find.
Yeah.
And he, his grandmother, Beatrice, really became this figure in my life as well, because we would, you know, I would meet him at his house and he would, and I would come in and we would talk. And I ended up walking her to church on Sunday.
Wow.
And she introduced me to the families in the neighborhood. Once again, all Black Baptist church.
Sure.
But I never felt the separation of color,
Even though
um,
you were the only one.
even though I was the only one.
You
Yeah.
felt at home. I just wanted to ask you because this sounds almost idyllic. Um, this relationship with him. You're getting high at this time. Are you still getting high?
In the beginning, I was getting high a lot. And when I got high, I would oftentimes go into a psychosis,
Mm.
and I would hear my ancestors talking to me. So a lot of audio hallucinations. My grandmother, others, and I was, of course, convinced it was real. And to this day, I'm not sure really what to think, because I know that certain substances can open pathways and doorways to other sort of dimensional spaces.
Okay.
But clinically, you know, a clinical psychiatrist would say that I was having cocaine-induced psychosis.
Right.
And I had gotten to the point where I wasn't enjoying it really anymore. And it brought about a lot of fear for me, a lot of anxiety. And so I was trying to move in the direction of stopping.
Okay.
And even though there was a lot of substance around, I began to take less and less of it from him at the end of the day and the end of the night. And I attribute that to really feeling as though I was being accepted by
Mhm.
him and by his grandmother. And he had a girlfriend as well who was pregnant.
Mm.
And there was another figure who was a young prostitute who I became friendly with as well. And it felt like a little family, like a very dysfunctional family.
Like girl friendly with or just friendly with?
We never were intimate with each other, but she used to come over and knock on my window when it was cold out and come up the fire escape, and she would sleep on in my bed with me. But
Another kind
we,
of intimacy.
yeah, that sort of intimacy, but
Mhm.
never, you
Right.
know, romantic or sexual intimacy.
What about Flynn? Was he using at that time?
Flynn used periodically,
Mm-hmm.
but not really too much.
Okay.
He wasn't an addict like I was an addict.
Right.
And
Right.
he would often say to me, you know, why are you doing that to yourself?
Mm.
You know, and there we were, like sort of the ultimate paradox and contradiction. We were selling it and we were bringing it to people all over.
Right.
And he was, but I
That
think he was just trying to look out for me.
sure.
And
Oh,
and
I'm sorry. I just want to ask you one more thing because what you described was kind of like this progression of your drinking and using from the time that you were following the Grateful Dead, which doesn't mean on Instagram, meaning that you were literally following them around from city to city. to New York where you were drinking and then cocaine entered the picture, and then to LA where it was kind of all coke all the time, but in cooked form.
Mhm.
Um, Missing as your addiction progressed, you were missing the you were lonely. It sounds like you didn't have a family. You felt as if you'd been abandoned prior to that. And as you were growing up, you described that feeling. And so now with the dealer that you're driving around for, you find this surrogate family with whom
Yeah.
you feel at home. It's not, race isn't a factor here because it doesn't matter that you're white or they're black, but you found a place for yourself in this family. And the using starts to dissipate, right? You start needing it less and less and fearing it more and more, it sounds like.
Mhm. Yes.
Um, all right. So thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I had that right. Um, when did you finally stop using altogether? When did you get sober?
A few months in, maybe 3 or 4 months in to the two of us
Okay.
having our nightly rendezvous and going and having our adventures. And I just decided that I was going to give it up. And I had successfully done it
Right.
for a few weeks. And there was a noticeable change in my demeanor and in my energy. And I, when you're in the midst of that kind of serious addiction, I think that there sometimes is a belief that there's never any way that I won't be doing this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's no path for me. And but in that moment when I gave it up, I thought, the ingredients are there for me, which is this love and kindness and generosity from this family and this friendship. And those were the missing ingredients that I really needed
Yeah.
to start to love myself again, or to be even tolerant of myself. And that's, going back to the initial statement of I'm the only one whose drug dealer
Got her
got me
so.
sober. I attribute my sobriety to his friendship
Mm.
and to the love of his grandmother and of those really amazing, incredible, wonderful people that I met in Ghost Town.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the launching pad for me to get sober.
Amazing.
And, they had actually invited me to live in their home with them. Flynn had lost his younger brother to gang violence, and Beatrice, his grandmother, had given me some of his younger brother Willie's tennis shoes and some of his shirts. And he had a room in their home, and they invited me to come live with them. And I was going to do so. I pretty much had been evicted from my place, and I had packed my bags, and I was ready to move in. And in that moment, Flynn was arrested,
Um,
and that he went to meet some old people that I didn't know at a motel. And it's unclear whether it was a setup or not, but he was arrested, and that was his third strike. And at the time in LA, it was a 3-strike rule, and you did 25 to life. And so that dream of me coming and living, he had just become a father, his girlfriend had just had a baby, and he was incarcerated.
Is
And
he?
that's kind of the moment where everything fell apart again. And I used one last time. I was so angry, and I went and I bought some product, and I used, and then I spent the night on the beach, and I threw my pipe into the ocean, and that was it. But it's a very tragic and sad ending to the story. And so it was a very finite relationship, and it was so incredibly impactful on me and my life. And unfortunately, at that moment, I lost contact with Flynn.
Is he still in prison? Do you know?
He actually got out of prison a few years later on a technicality and moved down south. His family moved south after he was incarcerated. And he was killed a few years later.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
And Beatrice?
Beatrice passed away from natural causes a few years after that as well.
Yeah.
She was in her 70s. And I think she made it into her early 80s, but
Okay.
she had passed. Yeah.
Wow. What was the total amount of time that you and Flynn lived that way, like that you had that relationship?
I mean, it was a very concentrated and intense time
Yeah.
because it was almost a daily interaction that we had, a daily hang that we had with each other. But, not more than 6 or 7 months.
Wow. Well, they say that um oh my gosh, who wrote Oliver Twist? I'm blanking.
Um,
Scott's gonna find it for
I'm
me.
blanking as well.
Well, when he finds it, um, gosh, that's so terrible. Whoever wrote Oliver Twist spent a total of 6 weeks in an orphanage while they
Oh,
were growing up, and that impacted them to the point where this was the story that they needed to write.
Charles Dickens.
Charles Dickens, of course.
Charles Dickens, right. So,
Edit that part out, guys, where I don't remember.
yeah, exactly.
Oh no, we're keeping that in for sure.
So when I got some distance from this time in my life, and I got some sobriety long term, and my family of origin came back into my life, and I went back to school, and I fell in love, and I started my own family and had my own children. Throughout this whole time period, I knew at some point that this was the story that I wanted to tell. And I was holding on to it. It's a fragile story and a fragile moment in my life. And I wanted to make sure that I had done the healing that I needed to do before I sat down and wrote it. And, I did some writing in college and had written a few things here and there, but I had never written a book or a memoir. And so it was a first experience for me. And I really thought that I was going to have maybe some difficulty remembering some of the finer details. And, the book is written all from memory. And it was written 15 years after it occurred. And I tried to stay as authentic and true to fact as possible. But it all came back. It all came flooding back.
Yeah. It needed to be told, it sounds like.
It needed to be told. It's such a unique story. I haven't heard another story like it.
Me either. And all we do is tell unique stories. And I haven't heard a story like this.
And I've been in the rooms of AA for a long time, and I don't go to as many meetings now as I did once, in early recovery, but I've been to hundreds of meetings and I've heard so many stories and shared so many stories with people, and I've never heard another story like it.
Now, this is really unique. And has it been optioned? Is that something you can talk about?
It has been optioned, yes.
Can you explain what that means?
Yes, there's a studio in New York and Los Angeles called E1 Studios. And essentially they're a film production, television and film production entity. And they, a really wonderful actor that I'm friends with named Alessandro Nivola. And you may remember him from The Many Saints of Newark. He was the star of that film, the Sopranos prequel that came out last year. And he's doing a number of other amazing things. He read the book and he said, I really want to play this role. And he brought it to E1, and E1 optioned it, which essentially means that they are developing it with us. And we are going to probably next month be bringing it to the broadcasting world, which are the Netflix and the Amazons of the world, to try and see if they will partner up with us to get it made.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I know that Hollywood is a mess right now with what gets made and what doesn't. But like you said, it's such a unique story. It's very cinematic. I would go see this either on, at the movies or on television as a mini series or a limited series. I can totally see it. Before we get out of here, because we're close to time, can you tell us what depth psychology is? Because I know that's what you're doing now.
Of course. Depth psychology is a type of psychology that really became prominent with the writings and the teachings of Carl Jung, who was a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist that was very well known in the 20th century, in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And many people consider him to be sort of the godfather of modern day psychology. And what Jung believed is that the most important factor in determining how someone was doing emotionally was not really sort of the conscious elements that they were thinking about, but what was going on in the unconscious. And so depth psychology is really a look into the unconscious.
Okay.
And Jung believed very much in the soul as a conscious entity that lives within us, and that the soul's mission for each one of us is to help us grow and to help us heal and to alleviate our suffering. And so depth psychology is trying to find a pathway back to soul as a powerful healing apparatus.
Amazing. And then with the last couple minutes, talk to us about We Are All Addicts.
We Are All Addicts is my new book that comes out on January 10th. So next week.
As we're recording this, it's already out as you're listening. Yeah.
Yes.
You click the link in our bio to order it.
Essentially, it takes the aspects of depth psychology and provides alternatives to healing from all of the addictions that we share. And in the book, my premise is that addiction is archetypal, meaning that we all share it and we all know it in some form or another. Addiction simply being a loop of addiction being a loop of obsessive thoughts followed by some sort of compulsive action.
Okay.
So we do it with our phones, with technology, with work, with foods, with exercise,
Shopping.
with obsessions about the future and the past, with anxiety, with anger, with trying to look younger, with vanity. So there are all of these elements that I talk about in the book, and I offer very spiritual and very simple soul-based solutions.
Wow. We might have to have you come back on and talk about that, okay? Because I mean, and that's why I love the pitch when it came in. It's very aligned with both Scott and I know that Scott's going to talk to you tomorrow about whatever he's going to talk to you about after listening to this, but and maybe that'll come up. But I'd love to have you back on to talk about that, because I think it's another really important subject. Your story with Flynn was just so compelling. I had to have you come on and tell that. But yeah, tell me where people can find you.
People can find me through my website, www.carterstout.com, and that's CARDERSTOUT. Or you can just Google my name, Dr. Carter Stout, and it'll come up. And you can message me through my website.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. And thank you again for people who are listening who don't know. We had a little trouble getting the technology together for this interview, but we made it happen. I really appreciate you. And thank you for just getting into the story and letting go of all the frustration it took to get on
Of
to
course.
Zoom. And I really appreciate you.
I've
Thank
been
you.
really looking forward to this. Thank you so much, Laura.
Me too.
Hi, my name is Dr. Carter Stout, and I am the only one whose drug dealer got him sober.